Hello. My name is Luna. I live in a quiet little town called Ashwood, tucked somewhere between pine trees and forgotten promises. I'm 69 years old, a part-time librarian. And for the past year, I've had the unsettling feeling that I've slowly become invisible. Not in the ghostly sense. No worse. In the way people stop seeing you even when you're right in front of them. I wasn't always like this. I used to laugh more. I used to bake cherry cobbler with my husband, Edward, on chilly Sunday nights. We'd sip tea, listen to Miles Davis, and argue about whether the Blue Jays would win the World Series. We were married for 47 years. And in all that time, I never imagined how quiet a house could become after one voice disappears. Edward died on Christmas Eve. We were having dinner, our little tradition of roast duck, cranberry stuffing, and his favorite pecan pie. One moment, he was telling me about some ridiculous story he read in the paper. The next, his hand slipped from the fork. I thought he was just tired. But he slumped forward and never moved again. I can still hear the sound of the pie plate shattering. The kids flew in for the funeral. Brian, my eldest, with his wife Kendra, he works at a regional bank in Eugene. And Sophie, my daughter, with her husband Travis and their two little ones. They cried. They hugged me. They said they'd be there for me. You're not alone, Mom, they promised. We've got you. Then they flew back home. And silence took over. For 3 months, I wandered the house like a forgotten ghost. I'd talk to myself just to hear a voice in the room. I'd dust furniture that didn't need dusting. Rearranged books on Edward's shelf. Set the table for 2, only to put one plate back in the cabinet. Then Brian called. He had a thought. Why don't we move in with you for a bit, he said. It'd save us money while we look for a house. I said yes. Of course I did. I missed people. I missed life. A month later, Sophie called. Their landlord was raising the rent again. Could they crash for a few weeks? Of course. I said, it'll be nice to have the house full. That was nearly 4 years ago. At first, I welcomed the noise, the clutter, even the mess. It felt alive. But little by little, the feeling of being surrounded turned into being swallowed. My house became their headquarters. My kitchen. Their cafeteria. My calendar. Their convenience. And me. Some days I'm not sure who I am anymore. It's not that they're cruel. It's just they assume that I'll make breakfast, that I'll clean up, that I'll babysit, that I don't have anywhere else to be, anything else to do, that my time is endless and unpaid and unspoken for. And maybe I let it happen. Maybe I was so desperate to fill the silence. I forgot how much space I gave away. But something changed last week. Something cracked. It came in the form of a white envelope from the utility company. Inside was a number that shook me $3. 842. Unpaid. 3 months overdue. And a warning that services would be disconnected in 72 hours. The bills I thought Brian had been handling. That was the moment I stopped feeling invisible. That was the moment something in me stirred. Not rage. Not blame. Something older. Something deeper. Dignity. And that, I believe, is where my real story begins. The thing about slipping away in your own home is that it doesn't happen all at once. It's slow. Almost elegant. Like fog rolling in over a field. You don't notice it until you can't see your own feet anymore. When Brian and Kendra moved in, they started in the guest bedroom upstairs. Within weeks, their boxes spilled into the hallway. Then came the treadmill, Kendra swore she'd use every day it sat in the dining room for 6 months. The garage became Brian's home office, complete with a second-hand desk and dual monitors. I didn't say a word. Then Sophie showed up with her kids Madison, Shar, and Eli. 8, and her husband Travis, who was between jobs, always waiting on something to come through. They moved into the den and the sunroom. And just like that, the house didn't belong to me anymore. It became a hostel where no one paid rent. And I became the innkeeper who couldn't leave. The mornings were the worst. I'd be up before everyone, boiling oatmeal, making coffee, slicing fruit. I didn't ask. They didn't ask. It just became routine. And when they did stumble into the kitchen, groggy-eyed and half-dressed, not a single thank you was offered. Just barking, "Mom, where's my charger, Grandma? Can you take Eli to practice Luna?" The laundry didn't switch itself. Even my name started to feel like a command. My room, the only space that hadn't been invaded, was no longer sacred either. Madison would barge in without knocking to steal my hairbrush. Eli would use my closet for hide and seek. Every drawer I opened held someone else's things. Every hallway echoed with someone else's voice. I had become a guest in my own home. I tried to set boundaries. Light ones. Maybe everyone could do their own laundry. I'd suggest. Or, how about a weekly cleaning schedule? The responses were always the same. Chuckles. Eye rolls. Sometimes silence. Like I hadn't spoken at all. Once, I told Kendra that I'd like to visit my friend Carolyn on Saturday. She blinked. "Oh, I thought you were watching the kids that day. Sophie and I have yoga at 10. And somehow, I agreed. Again. It wasn't always like this. There were moments, tiny slivers, when we all sat down together. When Brian brought wine and told jokes like he used to. When Sophie made her famous lemon bars and Madison actually laughed at something I said. But those were rare. And they always felt borrowed. Like they didn't belong to this version of us. This new life had rules unspoken. Unwritten but ironclad. I was not to inconvenience. I was not to object. I was to accommodate. Smile. And be endlessly available. What hurt wasn't just the labor. It was the assumption that I no longer had needs. Désir. A voice. I remember one Sunday afternoon. I stood in the middle of my own kitchen, holding a sponge in one hand and a dripping plate in the other. The entire house was filled with chatter and footsteps, screens blaring, and children laughing upstairs. And yet I had never felt so completely alone. No one was cruel, but no one was kind either. And in that space between neglect and intention, something in me began to unravel. I didn't know it yet. But the bill wasn't the only wake-up call. It was just the one I couldn't ignore. It was a Tuesday morning when the envelope arrived. Thin. White. Government issued. I thought it was just another ad or maybe a water usage report. But when I opened it, something shifted in the pit of my stomach. Balance du 3. 842. RCE. Final notice. Termination of services in 72 hours. I read it twice. Then a third time. My hand trembled. I had given Brian money 3 months in a row. He'd offered to take care of the utilities to lighten my load. He said. I trusted him. I wanted to. He was my son. But the math didn't lie. The money never made it to the accounts. I stood at the kitchen counter. The sunlight from the window hitting that notice like it was on trial. And in some small, silent way, I think that was the moment something inside me snapped. Not in anger. Not yet. In clarity, I stared around the kitchen, the sticky counters. The cereal spilled on the floor. The toaster left half open with crumbs everywhere. And all I could think was, this isn't mine anymore. None of this is mine. That afternoon, I drove straight to the bank. The young teller, Caleb, I think his name was, looked at me with hesitation when I handed him my savings book and said I needed to withdraw everything. Are you sure? Miss Briggs, he asked gently. Maybe just a portion. All of it. I said. In cash. Please. He blinked. Then nodded. He must have thought I was senile or being scammed. I didn't care. I just needed to breathe again. I took the envelope thicker now. Heavy with every dollar I'd scraped together over the past 4 years, working part-time at the library, and drove to the utility office. The woman behind the glass didn't ask questions. She simply stamped the receipt and slid it across the counter. Your account is now current, I whispered. Thank you. Even though my chest felt hollow, like I had just given up the last thing that was mine. Driving home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just bought silence. I'd used up all my savings not to take a trip. Not to fix the leaky roof. Not even to buy a new pair of glasses. I used it to keep the lights on for people who didn't seem to notice when I wasn't even in the room. I thought of confronting Brian. But what would I say? You forgot. You lied. Was I that easy to ignore? Instead, I went upstairs to my room, sat on the edge of my bed, and stared at the receipt. San. Babai Sishar. Arshayi. A receipt for my own silence. My own guilt. My own exhaustion. Later that night, over meatloaf and mashed potatoes. Brian didn't mention the bill. Sophie was on her phone. Madison complained the potatoes were too salty. No one noticed I didn't eat. No one asked how my day was. I stared at their faces, people I'd raised. People I'd comforted, and wondered when I had become so replaceable. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and let the darkness press against my chest. I wasn't angry. Not yet. But I was done pretending. The next morning, I called Carolyn. I don't know why I waited so long, maybe shame. Maybe pride. Maybe both. But I needed to hear a voice that actually remembered who I used to be. She picked up on the first ring. Luna and I broke. I didn't plan on crying. But the second I heard her voice, the tears spilled like a dam, finally giving way. I told her everything, the unpaid bills, the savings gone, the silence at dinner, the way my house felt like a hotel with no checkout. She didn't say I told you so, though she had every right to. Instead, she said 4 words I didn't expect. That's not love. Luna. I sat there, clutching the phone, stunned into silence. They're not bad people, I muttered. They're just busy. No. Carolyn replied calmly. They're comfortable, and you let them get that way. You've turned yourself into background noise. That line hit hard. Then what am I supposed to do? Kick my own children out? No! She said. You're supposed to reclaim your home. Later that afternoon, she drove over in her little gray Subaru and stood in my doorway like a general on a mission. She handed me a card, simple. Matt White. Benjamin Holloway. Attorney at law. Ben helped my sister when her son tried to force her into a nursing facility for her own safety. Carolyn said, she's still in her own house. Alone. Independent. Happy. I don't want a lawyer. I whispered. You don't need a lawsuit. She said. You need information. Knowledge. Power. I held the card like it was on fire. The idea of sitting down with an attorney felt extreme, like I was going to war with my family. But as I looked around the house at the cluttered stairway, the juice stains on the carpet, the half-folded laundry that wasn't mine, I realized something sobering. They were already at war with my boundaries. They just weren't calling it that. The next day, I walked into Ben Holloway's office with trembling hands and an upset stomach. It was a small firm above a coffee shop in downtown Ashwood. Ben was in his 50s. Calm-eyed, soft-spoken. He poured me a glass of water before asking anything. "I'm not here to file anything," I blurted. I don't know what I'm doing." "That's okay," he said, nodding. "Start from the beginning." So I did. I told him about Edward's passing, the kids moving in, the bills, the unpaid promises, the constant erasure of my needs. When I finished, he said something that stopped me cold. "Luna, by law, you're the sole owner of the house. Your children have no legal claim to remain there if you ask them to leave." It was the first time I'd heard it said out loud. I blinked. But they're my family. They're also adults. Adults who are treating your home like a resource, not a relationship. That night, I sat on my front porch with the sun sinking over Ashwood's rooftops. I watched the wind play through the oak tree in the yard Edward planted when Brian was born. For the first time in months, I felt something stronger than fear. Resolve. They weren't going to hand me back my dignity. I'd have to take it. That Saturday, I cooked like I used to. Not out of duty. Not out of guilt. But out of purpose. I went to the local farmer's market and picked the brightest produce I could find. Sweet corn. Russet potatoes. Green beans that still snapped when you bent them. I even stopped by McAllister's bakery for a pecan pie, Edward's favorite. It felt symbolic. Back home, I pulled out the good china. The ivory set with the tiny blue flowers I hadn't used since our 40th anniversary. I polished the silver. Lit candles. Set the table in the dining room, not the breakfast bar where everyone usually plopped down. Phones in hand. Barely noticing the food. I made pot roast the way my mother taught me, slow and steady, with rosemary and garlic melting into the broth like a secret. By 6 o'clock, the house was full. Madison was complaining about TikTok drama. Eli was chasing the cat with a Nerf gun. Travis was yelling at the game in the living room. Brian and Kendra walked in last, still mid-argument about whether to refinance their car loan. But when they saw the table, the candles, the linens, the roast, they paused. "Whoa!" Brian said. "What's the occasion?" "No occasion." I smiled. "Just thought we could have a nice dinner. Together." Everyone took their seats, murmuring about how fancy everything looked. For a few minutes, it almost felt like old times. Almost. I didn't eat much. My stomach was too tight. Once the plates were half empty and the conversations had settled into soft clinks of forks against porcelain, I stood up. "There's something I need to say," I began. 7 pairs of eyes turned toward me. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a stack of neatly folded papers. I handed them out, one for each adult. The room went silent as they read. Sophie's brows furrowed. Travis blinked. Kendra gasped. "Wait," Brian said slowly. "This is an eviction notice." I nodded. "You're evicting us?" Sophie asked, her voice rising. "I'm asking you to move out," I said, my voice steady. "You have 30 days. Mom? Are you serious?" Brian scoffed. "We're your family. And for 4 years." I said, "I've given everything my space. My time. My savings without complaint. But I'm done living like a ghost in my own home." "You can't just kick us out," Travis barked. "I can." I said. Calmly. Ben Holloway confirmed it. I'm the legal owner of this house. What brought this on? Kendra whispered. Is this because of the bill? It's because I've spent 4 years being seen as a maid, a cook, and a free babysitter. And when I needed help, real help, you all disappeared. Sophie stood, arms crossed. This is punishment. No, I said softly. This is reclaiming my life. There was more shouting. Eli started crying. Madison ran upstairs. Brian muttered something about ungrateful elders. But I stood firm. I'd spent years keeping the peace, sacrificing, swallowing my voice. Now, for the first time, I was speaking not out of anger, but out of truth. And truth, it turns out, is louder than shouting. The day after the dinner, the house was quieter than usual. Not peaceful, just tense. Doors closed harder. Conversations turned into whispers. No one asked me to make breakfast. No one even said good morning. It was like I had flipped the lights on in a room full of secrets. And now everyone was shielding their eyes. I sat in my bedroom with a cup of lukewarm coffee, staring at the eviction notice template still open on my laptop. I had copies printed and dated, but I hadn't yet delivered the final versions. I wanted to give them one last chance, one last opportunity to choose to grow up before I forced them to. But when noon came and Brian walked past me without even looking up from his phone, I knew. The silence wasn't guilt. It was entitlement holding its breath. That afternoon, I called Carolyn. They don't believe me. I said, then make them. She replied without pause. We sat in the sunroom planning for hours. She had contacts, real estate agents, legal advisors, even a retired financial planner who had helped her organize her affairs after her husband died. We mapped everything out. That same evening, I met with Maya Wells. A bright, no-nonsense realtor with sharp eyes and a firm handshake. I didn't tell her I was ready to list the house, I just asked for a consultation. But when she stepped into my living room and glanced around at the scattered toys, unpaid bills, and worn furniture, she didn't sugarcoat anything. If you wanted to sell this place fast, she said, you could. With a little cleanup and staging, you'd get multiple offers within weeks. Could you be here Saturday afternoon? I asked. As a buyer, she tilted her head. A buyer, I nodded. I want my family to think I've already started the process. I need them to know I'm serious. Maya paused, then smiled. I like your style. 2 days later, I met with Ben Holloway again. I want you here too. I told him. Saturday, 3 p.m. Bring the folder. All of it. You're planning to go all in, he asked. I looked at him. They need to see what no really looks like. That night, I packed a suitcase and left it by my bedroom door, not because I was leaving, but because I wanted them to know I could. By Friday, the energy in the house had shifted. Kendra started doing her own laundry. Sophie cooked dinner. Brian even vacuumed the hallway. Badly. But still it was something. But it was too late for apologies born of fear. Saturday came. 3 o'clock sharp. Ben arrived first. In a gray blazer and carrying a thick legal folder. Maya came next, looking every bit the professional buyer. Carolyn stood beside me in the hallway, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder. When everyone was finally gathered in the living room, I stepped forward. I told you I was serious, I said, voice steady. Today, I'm showing you what serious looks like. The room fell silent as I introduced Ben. Then Maya. This is your 30-day notice, Ben said, handing out official envelopes. After that, this house will no longer be yours to live in. Maya held up the buyer's form. We've already done a walkthrough. This property won't stay on the market long. No one spoke. No one moved. And that silence felt different. It felt like the first time they truly saw me. Brian was the first to speak. You're bluffing, he said flatly, gripping the envelope like it was poison. Maya didn't flinch. Actually, she's not. I've walked through this property, taken notes, and made calls. If she wants it on the market Monday morning, I'll have a photographer here by Sunday. Sophie scoffed. You'd really sell this house. The one Dad built. I met her eyes. The house your father and I worked for. Lived in. Built memories in. Yes. I would. Travis shook his head. This is insane. You're going to throw your whole family out and live here alone. No. I said. I'm not going to live here. That shut them up. I'm selling the house whether you move out or not. And I'm moving on. Literally. Carolyn stepped forward, smiling like she'd been waiting for this part all day. Luna and I are taking a year to travel, she announced. RV. Open roads. New cities. No laundry baskets or carpools. Just sunsets and strong coffee. You're running away. Kendra mumbled. No. I said. I'm returning to myself. Madison peeked in from the hallway, her eyes wide. Are we really moving? I knelt to meet her gaze. Sweetheart, I love you. But grown-ups have to take care of their own homes. That's what your parents need to do now. She nodded. Quietly, and slipped away. Brian was pacing now. You blindsided us. You could have said something earlier. I've been saying things for 4 years. I replied. You just weren't listening. Sophie crossed her arms. And now what we just leave you have 30 days. Ben reminded her gently. That's the legal minimum. Luna has been more than generous. Travis threw his hands in the air. This is unreal. What's unreal? I said. My voice sharper now. Is how long I let this continue. How long I told myself that love meant silence. That motherhood meant martyrdom. That being needed was the same as being respected. I turned to Brian. You used my savings. To Sophie. You scheduled my time without asking. To Travis and Kendra. You treated me like furniture. No one interrupted me. Not anymore. The room was stone-cold silent. Maya closed her folder and nodded to me. I'll be in touch Monday. Ben stood. Luna. I'll walk you through next steps whenever you're ready. They left. Quietly. Like professionals who had just executed a well-practiced plan. Carolyn gave me a soft smile. You okay? I exhaled. I think I am. That night, no one came down for dinner. I ate by myself at the dining table with the candles lit again. Just because I wanted to. I washed my own plate, turned off the lights, and went to bed. For the first time in years. The house felt heavy, but not because of burden. Because of change? The next morning, I found Kendra in the kitchen, scrolling Zillow listings. Sophie was calling apartment managers. Brian, for once, was quiet. They were starting to move. Not just out, but forward. And me, I was already gone.